about the writers who have undertaken this project to kind of humanise and represent a diversity of lives. Probably a writer who we wouldn't think of falling within that project is V.S. Naipaul. And in some senses, my argument that we can put Naipaul within this project is deliberately provocative. Obviously, we all know that Naipaul has a very kind of tricky relationship with Trinidad. The fact that he didn't acknowledge Trinidad when he won the Nobel Prize. So, and also he has this, actually just a general vexatious reputation as a man of letters. We know about the magnificent ego of him as a writer. And we also know of his kind of opinionated intolerance and his fairly obnoxious public statements about the lives of others. In an interview in 2001, he accused E.M. Forster of being a predatory homosexual with a colonial twist. And more recently, and even more ridiculously, in an interview in 2011 at the Royal Geographic Society, he claimed that not a single woman writer could ever be his equal. So it would seem that Naipaul has actually provided us with plenty of evidence to support the observation of another Trinidadian writer, Lawrence Scott. And what Scott says is, Naipaul is old-fashioned about race, about women, about sexuality, an isolated figure, unaware of how the world around him is changing. With regard to these issues, or if aware, untouched, unmoved, isolated in a kind of conservatism, pursuing the now fictional writer self in these later days. And obviously there's pretty compelling evidence to agree with Scott's observation, but being a mischievous kind of reader, tonight I just want to offer a kind of different perspective and to talk about a figure within Naipaul's writing who I think is often completely forgotten and offers us a different way of thinking really about Naipaul. And quite remarkably, it's almost the only time in any of his writings where he absolutely kind of emotionally identifies as a Trinidadian and talks in kind of completely unironic terms about the idea of home. And for any of you who are Naipaul nerds, you might know that I'm already talking about Leonard Side, who is a decorator of cakes and arranger of flowers. And he appears at the very beginning of Naipaul's 1994 novel, sort of novel, Away in the World. And he appears right at the beginning. So there's just this very single page that prefaces Naipaul's return to Trinidad after this long, long gap, after the kind of scandal of having written in various uncomplimentary ways about the island. And he talks about his return to Trinidad, finding that everything was strange and not strange. And he says about going back home, and that word home is just kind of solidly there. And Side is, I think, we can read Side as this kind of queer figure who brings demonstrable pressure to bear on normativities of gender. He obviously lives between genders and across kind of culturally separated worlds as well. So his story, in the work, Naipaul says that this story is told to him by a woman school teacher. And Krystal's going to be my school teacher. Interestingly, the school teacher needs to go and find Side because she wants to teach her students how to arrange flowers, which is obviously such a gender normative thing to teach them. But the judge for this highly gender normative activity is Leonard Side, this arranger of flowers and decorator of cakes. And the first time she goes to find him, she doesn't know he's a mortician. So she walks in and she sees his fingers working on the body and she just runs away. The next time she goes to see him, she returns directly to the Women's Association, who he works for, and this is what she sees.
The little Spanish-style house was full of women, and inside the room, Leonard Side was doing things with dough, using his hairy fingers to knead dough. He was teaching the women how to make bread and cake. After he had finished doing the dough, he began to teach them how to ice a cake, forcing with those hairy fingers colored icing out of the special cones or molds he had. He pressed on and then into the molds with his hairy fingers, and out came a pink or green rosebud or a flower, which he then fixed with icing flecked fingers onto the soft iced cake. But I didn't like seeing those fingers doing this kind of work, and I liked it even less when at the end, with those same fingers, he offered the woman little things he had ice to eat.
So obviously the kind of gender dissonance that she registers in this kind of, body activity that she witnesses, for her the delicate, dexterous, delicious working of the fingers provokes this kind of recurring aversion. On the third occasion, because she's dressed as a teacher, she's mistaken for a doctor, and she's let straight into his bedroom where he's unwell. And this is, again, from that passage.
There I found Leonard's side, very sick and trembling, but dressed for a meeting with the doctor. He was in a shiny brass four-poster bed with a flowered canopy, and he was in green silk pajamas. His little hairy fingers were resting on the satin or silk spread he was using as a coverlet. He had laid himself out with great care.
So Side stirs these kind of feelings of pity and fear in the teacher, and it's this idea that he blurs boundaries that disturbs her. So his body, she comments how his body lies amid this kind of cultural melange in his bedroom setting. So there's crepe paper flowers, bows, and a framed picture of a radiant, beautiful Christ, even though she knows he's a Muslim. So there's this whole kind of idea of boundary confusion that she can't cope with. And she says,
it was his idea of beauty that upset me, I suppose. That idea of beauty, mixing roses and flowers and nice things to eat, with the idea of making the dead human body beautiful too. The mixing of things upset me.
So in the teacher's story, Side's hairy hands crossing between the work of mortician, flower arranger and cake decorator are agents of category confusion, which seems a really kind of Napoleon view. I mean, that's how we would think Naipaul would write. And she ends up by saying,
he frightened me because I felt his feeling for beauty was like an illness, as though some unfamiliar deforming virus had passed through his simple mother to him, and was even then, he was in his mid-30s, something neither of them had begun to understand.
So for the teacher then, that world intrudes on her senses, her sight, her taste, and she absolutely expresses this desire not to be touched by sight. But really interestingly, the narrative doesn't take us through to the end with the teacher. So what happens then is, unlike the teacher, Naipaul actually then narrates his desire to feel and to be touched by Side. Rather than looking away from him, he begins to narrate actually the intimacy between them. So after the school teacher's story, there's a very clear pause that's signalled in the narrative by a kind of line gap. And then the paragraph begins where Naipaul's voice comes in. This was what I heard, he says. And it's after that that his own considerations take shape, mainly the shape of his unknowing. So he admits he doesn't know what happened to Side. He doesn't know what Side would have known about his family, his history, or what he calls his nature.
All Side would have known for himself and his ancestors would have been what he had awakened to in his mother's house in St. James, in that he was just like the rest of us.
And that idea, just like the rest of us, at the beginning of this book, of Naipaul's coming back to Trinidad, to be able to say that this figure is just like the rest of us, in the sense that positioning between him and Side, I think, is quite remarkable. So he prefaces this life that's barely known to him, a life that has no official or even imagined Caribbean history to support it, and a life of kind of promiscuous cultural attachments, this life that moves across what's on offer in Trinidad, and a creative life that's constantly remaking, the beauty of a dead body, that speaks against the expected the whole time. I think that Naipaul, recognising that somehow as being like him and somehow as being a ground for fellow Trinidadianness, is really pretty powerful. And he goes on to say,
with learning, I can tell you more or less how we all came to be where we were. While the documents last, we can hunt up the story of every strip of occupied land. I can give you that historical bird's eye view, but I cannot really explain the mystery of Leonard Side's inheritance. Most of us know the parents or grandparents we came from, but we go back, all of us, to the very beginning, in our blood and bone and brain, We carry the memories of thousands of beings. I might say that an ancestor of Leonard's sides came from the dancing groups of Lucknow, the lewd men who painted their faces and tried to live like women. But that would only be a fragment of his inheritance, a fragment of truth. We cannot understand all the traits we have inherited. Sometimes we can be strangers to ourselves.
And I think that whole notion of him allowing that space of strangeness to the self and recognizing that this person whose claims to belonging are constantly, precarious, and obviously the knowledge of what that precariousness would be underlines his description of side. But the fact that he chooses this one figure who's kind of, in some ways, so unaccommodated, to gesture to his own feeling of accommodation, his own kind of sense of where he might position himself as a Trinidadian. But at the same time, I just want to end, that's kind of my, not in any sense a kind of defense of Naipaul, but just an observation that it's a very interesting figure in his work, and I think a figure that shouldn't be ignored. But of course, I guess what the really important thing to remember is that Naipaul can position himself philosophically as a queer figure. But he isn't positioned politically as a queer figure. And I'm not taking away the force of that philosophical positioning to claim some kind of kinship and intimacy and to say, I'm like him, he's like me. But at the same time, there's a really substantive difference between Naipaul's sense of exile and the actual condition of being denied full citizenship. Whatever the force of that philosophical persuasion of shared unbelonging might be, however much academically, intellectually, emotionally we might want to register that. At the same time, we have to acknowledge that the struggle for acceptance and rights and visibility is a different one, that Naipaul isn't undergoing on the same terms. And it seems to me that if we want to kind of find an imaginative space where all Trinidadians cannot be strangers to themselves, then we need to think about bringing the kind of philosophical into a political space too. Okay, thank you.
This is an introduction to one of the Caribbean's most important literary exponents with excerpts from In Another Place Not Here. I'm actually reading this on behalf of my friend who couldn't be here today. So if you have any questions, I can give you his email address. Grace is grace, yes? And I take it quiet like teeth and sugar. From the words she speaks to me and the sweat running down she and that sun one afternoon, and as I look up saying to myself, how many more days these 4 feet of mine can take this field? These blades of cane like a razor, this sun like coal pot. Long as you have to eat, girl. I look up, the woman like a drink of cool water. The 4 o'clock light, thin in she dress. She back, good and strong. The sweat raining off in that moment when I look and she snap her head around, that mouth wide, blowing a wave of tiredness away, pulling in one big breath of air. Them big white teeth. She falling to the work again. She fall into the 4 o'clock sun. I see she hot, cool, and wet. World was surer than anything I see before. Surer than the day I get born, because nothing ever happened to me till World came along. And when World come along, I see my chance out of what ordinary. Out of the plenty day when all it have for a woman to do is lie down and let a man beat against she body and work cane and chop up she foot and make children and choke on the dryness in she chest and have only one road in and the same road out and know that she tied to the ground and can never lift it up. And it wasn't nothing Will do or say or even what Will was or what Will wanted, because even now I can't swear, but it's just that I see Will coming, like a shower of rain coming that could just wash me cool, and that was sufficient. And if God spite me for this, it's so things is. I abandoned everything for Vulia. I sink in Vulia and I let she flesh swallow me up. I devour she. She opened me up like any morning, limp, and a rain light, soft to the marrow. She made me wet. She tongue scorching like hot sun. I love that shudder between her legs. Love the plain wash and see of her, the smell and bloom of her softness, and is all. And if it's all I could do on earth is all. She would say, open your eyes, I want to see what you're feeling. I don't know what she see in my eyes, but she's staring into me until I break. Her look say, Elizabeth, you is bigger than me by millennia, and you can hold me between your legs like rock cold water. You are wearing me away like years, and I wonder if you can see me beyond rock and beyond water as something human that needs to eat and can die. Even as you dive into me today like a fish and want nothing, or so you say. Something say to me, Elizabeth, you is not big enough for nothing. You have done live, and Vulia is your grace. That's an excerpt from the opening chapter of In Another Place. Is one of the most important writers in contemporary Caribbean literature. She picks up the mantle of the post-colonial establishment of a new Caribbean literary culture that embodies our shared history of migration, displacement, and rebellion from the likes of Derek Walcott and Edward Campbell Braffett. She was born in Gyisyawan, Trinidad, and emigrated to Canada at the age of 17. As a Canadian writer, she has garnered numerous awards and tremendous prestige for her fierce, visceral, and enigmatic words. Despite flying her craft overseas, however, much of her work is grounded in her experiences in the Caribbean and is deeply rooted in its history. A Marxist and feminist, much of Brand's work underlines her sense that writing is not just art, but a radical political activity, an essential tenet of the strife for radical democracy. In particular, her struggle to reclaim the female body and female sexuality from the masculine heteronormative colonization of previous centuries of tradition have made her an important herald of the plights of minority women that endure even in contemporary times. Her 1990 poetry collection, No Language is Neutral, was important for several reasons. Not only did it give her international literary recognition, but it announced her as an author willing to tackle the difficult gender and sexual issues of a regional culture that still saw those things as heavily taboo. She accomplished this with stark, piercing, and emotionally charged poetry that stirred readers and reviewers alike. Fiery and sensuous words in this following excerpt. History will only hear you if you give birth to a woman whose smooth, starched linen in the wardrobe drawer trembles when she walks, and who gives birth to another woman who cries near a river and who vanishes, and who gives birth to a woman who is a poet, and even then it is still simple. It is this simple. I felt the unordinary romance of women who love women for the first time. It burst in my mouth. Someone said, this is your first lover. You will never want to leave her. Brand spent several years in Grenada and was a part of the People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada during the revolutionary period. And much of her work was born out of these incredibly emotional and torturous experiences. Her novel, In Another Place Not Here, from which the opening excerpts were taken, explores the tribulations of the love between two women, Vulia and Elizabeth, as they struggle through life, first in revolutionary Grenada and then as new immigrants to Toronto. The novel sees Brand embark on a project of unfixing the field. Vulia, the main protagonist, is flooded with Brand's liquid imaginary that radically resituates her sense of identity as a black lesbian and as a socialist revolutionary. In Another Place Not Here, as Simon Bertaco so eloquently put, brings forward Brand's understanding of the political import of her lesbian writing in that project of rewriting history that she puts into practice cannot but imply by default also a revision of the history of sexuality. Pamela McCallum and Christian Olbey have stated that Brand does a wonderful job in this book of revealing the specific kind of codified racism whereby the specter of slavery continues to haunt the West Indies. The real beauty of Brand's work in Another Place Not Here, however, is that she manages to explore such dense ideological material while maintaining the lyrical majesty that has always been a hallmark of her work and ignites the fires of romance that burn ferociously throughout the story. Throughout the course of events in the book, we never lose sense of Julia and Lizette's fierce passion for each other. Brand's evocative writing allows us to feel their insecurities, their fears, and their passion as if they were our own. In Another Place Not Here is a masterpiece from a writer whose political engagement with her work is complemented by the impassioned words themselves. It is surely an important piece of work in the history of the advancement of racial and sexual equality in the Caribbean diasporic people.